Hi, I'm Stingray Robb, and you are listening to the DIVEBOMB IndyCar Podcast.
Welcome back, DIVEBOMB IndyCar Podcast, and we're joined once again by a very, very special guest. I think the first ever guest of the DIVEBOMB IndyCar Podcast. So about 2 years on, it's fantastic for Stingray Robb to rejoin us ahead of the 2025 season as you move to Juncos Hollinger Racing for the 2025 season. So St. Petersburg this weekend. How's the mood? How are you feeling?
Feel good. Thank you again for having me back on. I didn't realize I was one of your first guests there, so that's fun. That's a fun little fact to throw in there. But I feel good going to St. Pete. The test was very good in Sebring. I'm trying not to get my expectations too high, but I was very, very proud of what we were able to see from the team. Kind of day one, roll off the truck with a strong car, and I felt like I didn't have to knock the rust off too much. So I'm excited. I think it'll be a nice weekend.
Obviously, as you said, you moved to Juncos Hollinger Racing for this year. So how did the move sort of come around? How long was it in the works? And then how did you ultimately come to sign for Juncos?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, third team in 3 seasons is not ideal. There's some lack of continuity that I think is difficult to deal with as a driver because you can't develop with the team from season to season. Obviously, last year running with AJ Foyt Racing, there were some highlights. Leading the Indy 500 was one of them. Having a great car there for the month of May, that was incredible. And there was multiple races like that. Gateway was another one where once we got the car figured out, that it was like on rails for the race, and we just kept moving forward. So we were initially planning to stay with that team for the 2025 season, but with the announcement of David Malukas coming around, our plans got to move around as well. So we began talking with Juncos actually a little bit before the Malukas news came out, before we actually knew about it, just as seeing what the opportunities were. And Ricardo had approached us just because of the relationship we've had in the past there with him. You know, running 3 seasons in the Junior Formula with Juncos, before it was Juncos Hollinger, and winning a championship there. There were some good memories. And so the opportunity kind of came about naturally. And as we entered the offseason, I think that maybe 3 weeks before, something like that, the announcement came out was when we signed. And then we were just trying to put the pieces together in the meantime. As we know, IndyCar is a tough sport on and off the track these days. So it was a challenge to get the deal done, but I'm glad we were able to sign with them and have the team and in as good a shape as it is.
And obviously you say there was kind of this expectation, maybe kind of looking back to last summer, that you would stay with Foyt. So how did you find out that Malukas was coming in? And did you know at the time that it would be kind of coming in to replace you?
Yeah, I mean, at the time, I actually found out about 4 hours before the announcement came out. So that was a bit of a surprise, but that was kind of like the expectation was shocked a little bit, but thankfully we were in a spot where we were already talking to other teams, Juncos being one of them. My manager and Peter Rossi did a great job to manage that relationship throughout the season and the off season. And so no hard feelings there either, though. I mean, I still cheer for my engineers, and Santino is a great teammate. So I'm sure that he'll have some great things coming this year. And I'm hoping those guys can have some fruits of their labor that are worthwhile.
So I think you said before, when you were last with Juncos, obviously in the sort of the road to Indy ladder, there was a bit of tension at the end of your relationship with Ricardo. So what was sort of the deal there into fixing that relationship and sort of building up that chemistry for you to be where you are now?
Yeah, so I joined Juncos back in 2019. And at that point, I was kind of like, I should have been a veteran in the series that I was in. It was the USF Pro 2000 series. And then we ended up winning that championship in 2020 together. So with that, I got the scholarship to move from USF Pro 2000 into Indy next for 2021. And that 2021 season was just really tough. I mean, there were times where I felt very frustrated as a driver because I wasn't getting the most out of myself. I felt like the car was not where I needed to be at all times, but that was part of the learning process together. I mean, it was still kind of a young team for them, engineering wise. And so there was a lot of development that still had to be done throughout the year. But I had a great teammate. Toby Sowery was my teammate for a good part of the season. And he's a great wheelman himself. So it was a lot of fun, but at the same time, it was very challenging. And by the end of the year, the relationships kind of had disintegrated a little bit throughout the team. Everyone was very frustrated with the results. And I think that the deal was Ricardo was very focused on the IndyCar program and putting that together and getting good results there. And I remember at that time, towards the end of the season, Callum Ilott had started to do a few races with them as a one-off entry. And so we didn't get to see the best of Ricardo and what his team is capable of doing because the focus kind of shifted elsewhere. And so when we left on the last race weekend, we'd already signed with Andretti Autosport for the 2022 season. And I think that was kind of the atmosphere was, we were already going elsewhere. So I was trying to do my best to get the most for the team on the race weekend, but it's hard. It's hard when you have that transition from season to season from teams, managing those relationships. So kind of reconvening with Ricardo, a few years down the road, we were able to approach that situation with, hindsight of saying like, this is what I have for my expectations with you, Ricardo, if we were to sign. And this is what I've seen in the past. And he said, this is what I've seen in the past. And we're kind of able to mend that relationship. And really, I got to see Ricardo's passion reignited, I think, in a way, over the course of the last few years, which is great because there's a reason that he has come from where he's come from to this point in motorsports. I mean, that green team has done a lot and has been impressive at different times. And so it hasn't been on accident. They have not, magically fallen into the right spots at the right time. They've worked their way there. So they know how to work hard. They have a deep passion, a deep motivation to run at the front of the field. And I think a big part of that is setting the right expectations for the right days. And so we were able to do that. And that was a big part of why we were able to sign with them.
And I guess you've mentioned a little bit about last season, but looking back at 2024, which was obviously your second year in the series, but I think you've described it almost as a second rookie year in some ways because the first year with Coyne was quite difficult. So I guess just what is the overwhelming emotion and feeling about how last year went, and then also the progress that you've made as a driver in these 2 years in IndyCar so far?
Yeah, great question. You say overwhelming feeling. I would say underwhelming feeling, just because that was kind of the name of the game last year. There was many times where I thought that we'd be running further up the field and just couldn't put it together. We had, unfortunately, quite a few mechanical failures throughout the season as well. St. Pete with the brake failure, Barber with the steering wheel actually falling off the steering column. That was pretty incredible. It's kind of hard to drive a race car without a steering wheel. I have noticed that there was some new parts integrated for this season on all the vehicles to avoid that this year. So I was happy about that. Adds a little bit of weight, but at least you'll have a steering wheel at the end of the race, hopefully. There's just little details like that kind of fall through the cracks. And it was frustrating because I felt like there were times where I could get the most out of the car, but we'd have something happen. And there were times where the car was good and I just couldn't put it together. So that was kind of the second rookie season stripes, if you will. I think that you have this sort of inconsistent season as you're learning, setting expectations. And I think going into this year, what I've learned is what I need from a vehicle, as well as the systems that I need behind the scenes to develop that vehicle. And I think that Juncos has done a very good job from an organization standpoint to build structure and systems throughout the team that allow me to have that sort of clarity, which leads to confidence in the long run of what kind of a vehicle is that I have and what I'm driving. So I'm excited to see what the season has in store for us. And again, I think it will continue to be a learning season because anytime you stop learning, you start moving backwards. And especially in IndyCar racing, things change, things adapt. I think the crazy thing about IndyCar is how many different tire compounds we have. I mean, if you look, it's a black sidewall tire, right? They're all the same. No, incorrect. I mean, we have one for ovals, we have one for super speedways, we have one for street courses, and then we have multiple for each road course, along with an alternate tire that also changes at each of those events. So, I mean, there's like 11 different compounds or something like that we run on throughout the season. So the car is constantly changing it. And so it's the driver's job to adapt. But if you don't have a foundation, then it's really hard to make that adaptation.
You mentioned this as well, that Juncos is obviously the third team you've been with in 3 years. I mean, is that change every year so far in your IndyCar career? Is it unsettling, or are there actually some positives that you can take from it and it does help your learning in some ways heading into this year?
I think it has helped. The learning has been a steep curve so far. And I think that every year I've moved forward as a driver, and I hope that this offseason I've done the same. And so I don't see it as a super big negative. I think it would have been nice to start my IndyCar career with a team and really develop into the driver that they needed and develop the car around what I needed. Because when you do that, you look at guys like, I mean, Scott Dixon, I think, is a great example, but he's a wheelman either way. But he's been at Ganassi for so long. They know his programmer, Will Power even. I mean, he's working with the same engineer that he's had pretty much his whole IndyCar career, I'm pretty sure. So when you look at guys like that, they're not redeveloping their language and communication in between seasons. So when he says, hey, engineer, I have a 1 out of 5 oversteer on the exit of this turn, he can pull that out of his memory bank of, okay, 1 out of 5. When we did Surfer's Paradise or whatever, like back in the day, this spring package was that 1 out of 5. So that scale, that communication, it's built over time. And I think at that point, the engineer understands what a driver is sensitive to. And that's the great thing about motorsport racing, is that it's not just the driver, right? Like, it's the whole team and how they collaborate that leads to greatness. And so when you get that kind of special moment of, hey, remember 2 months ago when we were at Indy GP and we tried this geometry change and it did this, and there's like no other words to describe it other than pointing backwards. It's like, there's clarity in that. And when you make that change, you're like, that's it. Whatever that feeling is, I understand it, and that's it. So having that continuity is big. But I've definitely been kind of on a fun learning curve, changing teams from year to year.
So last year for you obviously had some personal highlights, the first top 10 at Gateway, a good run at the Indianapolis 500. So heading into this season, do you have any sort of expectations or goals you want to take away from this season? What do you want to come back to after Nashville and think, okay, that was a good season for me?
Yeah, I've been asked this question quite a bit. I'm recently married. So one of my goals is that I can stay married, and happily so. Molly is my wife, and she's a big fan of motorsports as well. So I don't think that should be too big of an issue. But one thing that I realized this offseason is that I wasn't really enjoying IndyCar racing. And I think that the key to success in anything is to have a passion for it. And so my goal is to get through the season and say, yeah, that was fun. Because I'm a competitive person, and I'm not going to have fun finishing last. So hopefully I can stand back and say, yeah, that was fun. And I think that the results, they will be what they'll be based off those expectations at the end of the year. If I were to put a number to it, I mean, I think it'd be really tough, just because, again, IndyCar racing is very, very difficult. It's very competitive. And there's no one that I don't think deserves to be in a seat. I mean, there's definitely guys that are sitting on the sidelines that I think that could very easily be competitive in IndyCar racing. But the guys that are here, they're here for a reason.
I guess just following up on that, how do you go about almost refining that enjoyment as opposed to just purely focusing on like being super competitive?
It's been a little bit of a process for me. I think this plays into my faith a little bit. I don't know how much you guys know about my faith, but it's a big part of who I am and how I see the world, and it's a paradigm I see things through. But I think a lot of times we hear, I have a calling towards this, and I felt that calling towards racing for much of my life. And subconsciously, I think I held that calling to God's truth for who I am. And if I'm not able to do that, then it's a complete failure of faith. And so I've realized that the only true calling that I can have is God's word and what he explicitly has already said in God's word, the Bible. And so I've held that as truth this offseason, and that racing is a gift of passion that I've been given. And so I don't have to put that subconscious pressure on letting it be a complete failure of faith if it doesn't work out. I don't need to have that. And when that clarity comes, there's confidence that comes along with that, but it gives me the freedom to enjoy it for what it is, as well as, kind of let it be honoring in a different way. So it was a bit of a shift in faith rather than anything else, which is kind of unique. And I'm not sure a lot of other drivers have had that, but it's a spot that I had to get to mentally to kind of see, okay, I can have fun doing this, and I'm allowed to do that. And I feel very blessed to be in the spot that I'm in. And so I'm trying to do it from a place of gratefulness and trying to not put too much expectations on myself. and let that subconsciously ruin who I am in the midst of a race weekend.
And I think, yeah, just to close, people obviously love to talk about finances and budget, and almost kind of sometimes fail to credit drivers for actually going out and finding these partners and putting these deals together, because that's a whole skill in itself. So I guess just to finish off, what sort of work have you had to do in this kind of modern age of racing just in order to get these deals and put these deals together?
It's very tough. I mean, it's very, very tough. I think, honestly, Connor Daly did a great job on his podcast kind of explaining the process of what it takes to put a package together these days. But that's why it's so difficult, because when you're talking to companies that are as large or big enough to sponsor an IndyCar, you have to be creative, and it's not just one person that you're convincing. I've been blessed enough that I've had a company with me for a little over 5 years now, that they've believed in who I am and what I'm doing, and have been the support group that I needed them to be at different times. And so that's continued, and that relationship is something that I have to manage. But I think that that's kind of the deal, is that people forget we're dealing with people, right? So having a relationship with a company from a personal connection point is way more impactful than anything else, because it allows you to be more creative and not have the business structure around a mindset or anything like that. But from a true difficulty standpoint, it hasn't been me working behind the scenes as much as the team around me. Yeah, my mom is what I affectionately call my momager, but she works sun up to sundown pretty much to try and figure out how to make this thing keep rolling. And there's a team around her as well that she works with, that they're putting packages together, they're brainstorming, they're being creative, they're trying to form a opportunity for these companies that is more than just a sticker on the side of the car, right? And I think, a big part of that is how IndyCar is doing. How healthy is IndyCar as a marketing machine? And it has been a little bit of a struggle over the last few years, I think. So it's encouraging to see the Fox Sports program kind of come about, because we're already kind of seeing the fruits of that. And I think that as it grows, hopefully the series is able to feel that impact sooner rather than later. I think that we need that boost very quickly. Otherwise, the success of the sport as a whole, I think, can go downhill. But anyways, that's a little deeper than we probably need to go today.
Stingray, that's awesome. We're looking forward to the season ahead very much so, and obviously going to be cheering you on as a good friend of the podcast. So thanks very much for joining us, and best of luck for the season ahead.
Awesome. Thank you, Archie. Thank you, Dan. I'll see you guys at a race at some point, I'm sure.